the Liberator pistol from World War II. A romantic idea to drop cheap, kind of throwaway firearms behind enemy lines to help liberate an oppressed, persecuted population. Well, what if we were doing that today? What about a modern Liberator firearm? That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world firsthand experience. I am blessed to serve you as host, military, law enforcement, private security, contracting background, and some other stuff, bullet points for the bio are in the show notes. First and foremost, though, I am a Christian. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Okay, first off, I want to talk about a little bit of the history of the Liberator pistol. As I understand it, this was a .45 caliber, kind of one-time use, very cheaply made pistol to be dropped behind enemy lines. I believe it occupied France, but maybe they had ideas for other places. It was a romantic idea. The Liberator pistol was actually a thing. It was produced, although I don't think it was ever actually dropped in theater. But it's a romantic idea. Would it have worked if it had been used? I don't know. I'd like to think that some French would man up and actually, liberate themselves, but who knows? I am no expert on World War II history. If you want the specs on the actual Liberator pistol, then go look that up. That's not what we're talking about today. I'm talking about the idea of the Liberator pistol and what it was, and what if we were doing that today? And my first thought is, well, where would that be a thing today? The first thing that popped into my mind that is topical is Nigeria. Now, if you are unaware, Christians, Nigeria is being attacked. Christians in Nigeria are being persecuted. And I don't mean like they're being called names by blue-haired liberals on TikTok. I mean they're being killed. Something like 1,900 Christian churches recently have been destroyed. I don't know the number of Christians that have been killed for being Christians, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Kidnapped, unspeakable things, or things that I'm not going to speak about on this podcast, being done to women and children. Armed gangs of people on motorcycles with firearms and machetes just literally killing off entire groups of people. That's what's going on right now in Nigeria. So when I thought about a good modern use case, that's the first thing that popped into mind. Now, let's just do a random thought experiment here. Let's say you had a philanthropist, somebody wanting to help out these Christians being persecuted and killed in Nigeria by Muslims. And I'm not going to beat around the road. They're Muslims, and they're Muslim killing Christians because they're Muslims and they hate Christians. Period. End of sentence. Politically correct or not, Muslims have been killing Christians for about 1,400 years. That's what they do. It's not a radical wing of them. It is them. It's what they do. Okay, so anyway, I got sidetracked there. A little passionate about that. But let's say that we had a modern philanthropist who was like, you know what? I have got a way to get into Nigerian airspace and airdrop supplies to help these Nigerians. And from what I understand, I've never had boots on the ground in Nigeria. I've never worked in that AO, that area of operations. But from what I understand, there are these, roving gangs of Muslims who have been given kind of a pass because the Muslims took political control and got control of the government there. So they're killing Christians, and they're just kind of going around. And most of these Christians, from what I understand, are small farming communities. Small farming communities that are, hacking out an existence in Nigeria and have been doing so for quite a while until the Muslims show up and cut their heads off or shoot them or whatever, because they're not allowed to own guns, but the Muslims are. So let's say we're going to even the odds. We're going to fly over this airspace and airdrop them firearms. And we're going to do this in keeping with the Liberator concept, because it would be great. You might say, well, let's drop them off, AR-15s and Glock 19s with chest rigs and nods. Okay, numero uno. I don't know how to say that in Nigerian. I don't speak Nigerian. But they're not going to know how to use those. They are farmers. They are in a country where they don't have a Second Amendment. They don't have like a constitutional Second Amendment to own firearms. They may have never held a firearm in their entire life. They probably also haven't watched Hollywood, so they don't have any of those bad habits either, but they don't know. An AR-15 is not the thing to give them unless you can give them training. And that would be great, but in this scenario, that's not the scope of this discussion. So relax. I'm not saying these are great firearms. The whole point of these is they're not great firearms. The point is to take out an attacker and get their firearm, or at least resist enough that they think twice about attacking you, or to take them out and get their firearm, which would be an AK-47 most of the time. So I'm not saying these are the best things. It would be great if we could train, equip a bunch of yeoman farmers in Nigeria to resist the Mohammedan onslaught. But let's say we're airdropping things that they can use. Something you could give, with a bunch of pamphlets with pictures to say this is how you use this simple firearm. And going back to the AR-15s and Glock 19s thing, even if they could figure out how to use them, they probably don't know how to aim them. That's probably outside the scope of them figuring that out. And it's nothing against them. It's not because they're not intelligent. It's just because they've never had any experience. Also, let's say you have X amount of dollars. Let's say you could drop all that kit. You might be able to arm a village for X amount of dollars. You might be able to stop that one village from being massacred by Muslims. But if you did the Liberator concept, maybe you could arm 100 villages, an entire front, because from what I understand they kind of move in regions and kill village after village after village. Well, if you could stop that, like get an entire region, entire line, like make a working Maginot line of armed Christian farmers, maybe you could stop that onslaught. Maybe they would think, because they're cowards, right? They're going to go against unarmed people. They're not going to stand and go toe-to-toe. They're cowards. So if you could do that with a bunch of villages, that may actually be better tactically. Okay, so let's say that we're doing this. So what's on the American market today? You're going to somehow get these guns, and then your philanthropist friend that flies over Nigerian airspace at night is going to drop these off with crates and leaflets. What would be best on the market today? Well, there's a few things. One of the first things, if you're going to stick with the handgun concept, the pistol concept that comes to mind that's affordable, would be Heritage Rough Rider pistols. Heritage Rough Rider pistols, I've seen them on special lately for under $100. It's a 6-shot 22 revolver. Again, not the best handgun. We're not talking about the best. We're talking about something that you can take out an attacker and get his weapon, or sneak up on somebody and take their weapon. This, you could send a simple leaflet. You cock the hammer, pull the trigger. We're not even worried about reloading. We probably wouldn't even give them enough ammo to reload like the Liberator. It'd probably just have 6 shots in it. They pull the hammer and pull the trigger, and hopefully by that time they've got something better, or they've at least stopped the attack. Right? We're not worried about them being armorers and figuring out things. They probably have no idea that guns even need to be cleaned. So you could go that route. $100 for a 6-shot repeater. Granted, it's a 22 long rifle. It's not great. But if you got a machete gang coming after you, you plug a couple of them with a 22 when they're right in front of you, right? Wait until you see the whites of their eyes. And even if they survive and kill a couple people, the fact that they've now got a couple of 22 holes in them might make them slow down, because they're not just killing 1 or 2 people, they're killing a lot of people. That's something. I'm not saying it's the best. It's just one of the things that came to mind. It's a modern, cheap handgun that you could buy in mass. The other thing, if we're sticking with the handgun concept, would be a flare gun. There are like 36, 37 millimeter flare guns that you can get, and there are adapters. Now, if you were buying a bunch of the flare guns, you could probably simply make an adapter with a pipe. We're not worried about U.S. firearms laws because we're not doing this in the U.S. in this thought experiment, right? where you can put some kind of pipe in there, and you can, whatever size pipe that is, and you could shoot 12-gauge shotgun shells. Or they even make adapters that you can buy, that you can fire 12-gauge shotgun shells in it. Now, in America, you'd have to get all the paperwork done or whatever, but not Nigeria. Nigeria, you can't own guns anyway. So, so you could get the adapters to fire the 12-gauge or 22 or something else, 20-gauge, 410, whatever adapters they have, or you could just make them en masse. You could buy the flare guns, probably cheaper than trying to make something, and you could have a bunch of flare guns. Single shot, let's just stick with the 12-gauge. That is devastating at close range. You could give them a bunch of cut shells, which is just a 12-gauge bird shot. If you were trying to go most bang for your buck, literally, you could just do a cut shell, cut around where the wad is, and it's a quasi-slug. At the kind of ranges these are going to be used at, it would be devastating. Or if you wanted to splurge, you could get a round of buckshot. Just send simple leaflets. Pull back hammer, pull trigger. Super simple. I've seen those, flare guns for well under $100. That's what I could think of affordably on the handgun side. I'm not saying that's the best option, right? They don't need to be concealing these. You could airdrop crates of long guns, and the first thing that came to my mind was these break open single shot shotguns, 20 gauge or 12 gauge. These are simple and safe to use. Now you could go the Obrez route and you could just cut these off, right? You could, because again, you're not dealing with U.S. firearms laws, you could cut off the stock and you could cut off the barrel at whatever size you wanted. And that's a pretty potent, sawed-off shotgun. Granted, it's a single shot, but these are so simple with the little latch and everything. You could probably, with simple instructions, get, splurge and get them 3 rounds. 3 rounds of buckshot or, 3 rounds of cut shell slugs or waxer slugs or whatever. And you could arm them with 3 rounds. It's not great, but if they're invading your village, it's probably going to be CQB type stuff anyway. If every hut they go in, they get a chest full of buckshot or even a cut shell, a 12 gauge to the chest, that's going to stop an attack pretty quick. If every hut they go into to kill women and children, the woman comes out with a shotgun and blasts them in the chest, that's going to stop that attack pretty quick. And you can find some of these single shot shotguns, 12 gauge, 20 gauge, for right around $100. $1.25, $125-ish. And a lot of these are the Turk nasty shotguns. And normally I say stay away from these. Stay away from these, nasty Turkish shotguns, and don't give Muslims money that want to cut your head off, as in the thing we're talking about today. However, if you can cut their head off with their own sword, I probably would buy a bunch of these and give to people to fight Mohammedans made by Mohammedans, right? These are Muslim followers making guns, and they're going to be used to kill Muslims. I could stomach that. Normally I would say don't give money to them, but if you were going to do that, it's kind of a beautiful irony there. But the single-shot shotguns, break open single-shot shotguns, give them a couple of shells, those are pretty simple that I would trust them to reload those. Even with simple pictures, they could probably figure that out. You could give them regular ones or sawed-off ones. I'd probably just stick with the regular ones, depending on what the weight restrictions were and how many I could drop. But that's not a bad option. Maybe you go full stock because they're way easier to aim. Just get the ones with the rib and just simple instructions. Look down rib at target and, make a simple picture, like a sight picture. I'd probably leave the full stock on there and saw the barrel off at the end of the forend, so they don't blow their hand off. But that with what would that be, 12-inch barrel or so, that would be pretty devastating. That would be a pretty devastating weapon, affordable, cheap, massive firepower. Give them 2 or 3 shells. That's a good option. The other one for right around that same price range, there are a couple of companies, Savage being one, Rossi being another, that make semi-automatic 22 rifles. Now, these are going to weigh less, and the ammo is going to weigh less. So if you're dropping in ammo and rounds, Again, I don't know that I would, if they'd be able to figure out how to reload these, and depending on how long before you drop them off and how long before they use them, they might get really dirty. Because again, these people probably don't know how to clean guns, or don't know that you need to clean guns even. So I'm less keen on this option. I mean, you could probably load a single-shot shotgun up and carry it around for 3 years, even in nasty environments. It's probably still going to go off when you pull the trigger. A semi-auto 22, probably not. But it is an option, and it has some advantages. You could just have them and drop it with a fully loaded magazine, which is going to be around 10 rounds, give or take the model, right? But 10 rounds of 22, and you could just, simple instructions, rack the bolt, pull the trigger. We're not worried about them reloading. We're not giving them multiple magazines, right? Just the rounds in the magazine, which would be around 10. They're probably not going to be very good at aiming these things, but you get a group of farmers with 10-round 22s with a motorcycle gang coming. It's probably going to make them turn around if they if they're volley firing, even if most of them miss. So there is something to be said for repeatable firepower and semi-auto. Although I don't know how many of those are going to get through a magazine. I'm not saying these are the Savage semi-autos that are cheap or the Rossies don't work. They probably work fine when they're cleaned and they have maintenance and stuff like that. But again, if you drop these off and they don't get attacked for, let's say, 6 months, with dusty, nasty, African desert environments or hot, humid environments, I'm not sure how well they're going to work. But it is an option. It would be an option. The other thing you could do is manufacture your own. And it's even legal here in the United States. You can manufacture your own firearm. It's not illegal to manufacture your own firearm. But if you were making a bunch of guns, you could stick with the 12-gauge option or 20-gauge option. And a simple way to do it would be just get 2 pipes. One that's the same size as the shotgun shell, where the rim stops the shotgun shell. You put it in there, and you get a second pipe that fits over the first pipe, and you weld on 2 simple handles, one on each pipe, and you slam them together, and the shotgun shell goes off. You could... I don't know. I haven't priced metal pipe lately, but the great thing about the shotgun is that it's very low pressure compared to like a rifle or a handgun round even. They're pretty low pressure. So you don't need like space age pipe. You need, simple metal pipe. And you'd have to look up the specs on this. Don't blow your face off. But you get decent pipe for the first pipe, and you weld a simple firing pin in the back of the cap of the second pipe and 2 handles, and you've got a firearm. And you could do what we talked about, kind of similar. Make it, 12 inches long or whatever, and you slam both pipes together. That's a pretty effective weapon. And you could probably make those in mass. You could manufacture those pretty affordably. Now, you can't manufacture for somebody else in America. You manufacture for yourself. But again, if you could find a place to do this in Nigeria or wherever, where you just were going to leave, and weren't worried about the laws there, because they're certainly not worried about using the government to turn a blind eye to kill Christians, it seems. But you get the idea. You could manufacture those very cheaply. Now, there are some of those Turk Nasty shotguns I've seen pumps for I just saw one today when I was looking it up, $135-ish for a repeating pump shotgun. Now, you and I might think, how hard is it to reload a pump shotgun? Well, for you and I, it's not that hard because we've probably done it. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are familiar with how a pump action shotgun works. But they're probably not. So unless you can give them some training, as much as I would like to arm a bunch of them with pump shotguns, I think that would be fantastic. They're probably not going to know. They're probably not going to know where the release is, because you can't just pump it unless you hit the button. Wherever that button is, that might get them killed. But of all the repeating firearms that I think would work 6 months after you drop them off, just going with this scenario, with the most firepower, that's a pretty decent one. And you're talking not much more money than a single shot. So that's, and again, these are not good guns. These cheap Turkish pump shotguns, I would not count on them if this is your life-saving tool. But, I would not count on you taking one of these to a training class and learning how to run a pump shotgun for defense. I'm not advocating that. But if you're going to drop it off for somebody with no training and they're going to get a magazine full of ammo, it's probably going to work for 5 rounds. Even the cheap garbage Turkish shotguns are probably going to work for 5 rounds. So that's something. And it's repeatable firepower. If you could somehow illustrate how to actually operate it, because on these you'd have to deal with safeties or the button to actually load it if you're going to carry it cruiser ready. But I think you're getting beyond the knowledge and scope of the people you're dropping this to. Again, I would love to see well-armed, well-trained, yeoman farmers in Nigeria, but that's not what we're dealing with. So not that they couldn't learn, they certainly could. I'm sure there can be very intelligent people, but they don't have the experience. And the experience is often the most important part. So those are some thoughts on modern Liberator concepts. And you could take this and apply it to whatever AO thought experiment you're thinking of. Right, there are persecuted people groups and Christians all over. And this is what's topical right now, but maybe you listen to this in a year. Maybe something else is topical, sadly. But is there something I'm missing that's super cheap that would arm somebody that needs to be armed with simple instructions, a minimal amount of training or no training, just simple pictures, simple explanation? This is how this works. Again, in normal circumstances, I would never advocate that. I would say get training, and get a decent firearm. Your life may depend on it. But in this situation where it's this or nothing, the Liberator concept today with what's available today. What are your thoughts? Couple of tactical verses of the day. If a man is caught breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. Another is, whoever sheds man's blood by man, his blood shall be shed. With that, thank you for listening and have a blessed day.